I gave up what many people would consider to be one of the best passports in the world and exchanged it for a collection of lesser passports. And not only have I never felt more free, but I haven't even noticed the difference. And so if you think one Western passport beats a couple of lesser passports, today I'm going to tell you why I think you're wrong. So you'll see it in the comments section, including, I'm sure, in this episode. You hear people out and about talk about it. And I think it's often driven by news stories such as illegal immigration, that everyone's trying to come to our country. We did a full rebuttal to that before. But this idea that having a US passport or an Australian passport or a British passport, I think the British passport, people are not feeling quite as confident about it in the last couple of years. But if you have this Western passport, I hear so many people saying, like, well, that's all I need. Why would I need something else? In fact, I even hear people say, my Australian passport is the best in the world. Why? It's statistically not. We publish the Nomad Passport Index every year. It's nowhere near number one. The US is barely number 40. The passports that you think are the best are probably the best just because you've been told that, and because there's a sort of echo chamber that if you have a US passport, you probably know a lot of other people with US passports, and it feels nice to think like, hey, we have the best one. I'm not here to tell you that having a Western passport's a bad thing. In fact, one of the things that we help people do at Nomad Capitalist is get citizenship by descent. If you have an ancestor from Italy or Greece or Ireland or any number of European countries, as well as Latin American countries, we can help you go back through your family tree, sometimes 2, 3, 4 generations, and claim that citizenship. There's nothing wrong with having Italian citizenship, but I think that only having one Western passport, only having one passport at all, is going to be a risk as we enter a more multipolar world. But what I want to push back on today is the idea that somehow one group of people are more fortunate and that that should apply to you. No doubt, if you are American, Canadian, German, Australian, you can go to more places than someone from Colombia, than someone from Turkey, than someone from Thailand. Now, there's a lot of countries that have great passports, not quite as good as a Western passport, but almost as good. We've talked about the Central American countries, Guatemala, Nicaragua, etc. Pretty good passports. Some of the Eastern European passports have become increasingly good in recent years. I'm not talking about the European Union countries, I'm talking about beyond the EU. Countries like Malaysia, that's probably a passport you're never going to get. Their passport is pretty darn good. And then there's just kind of the random ones like Uruguay or Mauritius. Argentina are very good. Chile, arguably, is one of the best passports in the world. You can go to any of the countries an American can go to. And so I think we have to understand that the passport landscape is equalizing. You've got a country like Chile, which is now arguably just as good as any of the Western passports, other than it can't, you need a residence permit to live in Europe, whereas a European citizen does not. But Chileans can go to the US, Canada, Australia. They can also go to places like Russia. So geopolitically speaking, it's perhaps a bit more neutral, which I think is going to be a benefit in the future. But for me, if I just had a number of passports where maybe I need a visa to go to the US and a handful of other countries, do I worry about that if I don't really care about going to the US? Because when I was a US citizen, I avoided going to the US. Now, I do think that, when I renounced US citizenship, there was a certain aspect of not my circus anymore, and there was more of an openness to being there. But as time went on, I said to myself, I don't know what I'm really missing. I don't know that I want to go there. I just think back to all the reasons why I didn't enjoy living there before I left in the first place. And I say, why would I want to go back and do that? And then I talk to American friends of mine. They're like, oh, I went back and it was terrible compared to Thailand. It was terrible compared to wherever else they're living. Like, it's just so much more difficult. So if you're watching this, here's why I think having these lesser passports is acceptable. If you're already successful, you don't need your passport to make you rich. And so I think people have this idea that, oh, well, the Salvadorians are coming to the US. Why would I want to be a Salvadorian? Well, no, what you don't want to be is someone living in El Salvador with no resources to start out. The people who are coming from El Salvador are largely looking for economic opportunity. If you already have economic opportunity, what does it matter? Now, this brings up the first misconception. You can have a passport without having to live in that country. Just as there are Salvadorians with El Salvador passports who live in the US or Mexico or other places, there are people from any number of countries who don't live there. We help people get citizenship by investment. Some of the more common countries to do that, there are 5 countries in the Caribbean. You, in most cases, don't have to go there. I think that could change over the next couple of years, which is a reason to do it now if you want it to be a more convenient process. But you certainly don't have to live there at any point in the future. You make a donation, they give you citizenship. There's no long naturalization process. And so you can be a St. Lucian citizen, as I am, and you can say, I'm going to go get a residence permit in Dubai, in the UAE. Or I'm going to go and get a residence permit in Malaysia, or Singapore, or Panama, or I'm just going to travel. Sure, if I want to go to the US and I don't have another passport, I'll need a visa to go there. And depending on where I live and who I am and what I do and all that, maybe I get the visa. Maybe it's more difficult. But I can still go to a lot of other countries as a St. Lucian. And so by the same logic, El Salvador is talking about this new $1 million Bitcoin passport, which they've never really figured out in their passport programs, in my opinion, and $1 million is way too much. But if I could find a cost-effective way to be Salvadorian, I don't need to live there. I mean, if you're donating $1 million for a passport through Bitcoin, I don't think that you're looking for a job. I think you already have a business, you have a very stable investment portfolio, and so if you're already successful, the passport no longer matters. The best reason to have a good passport is the ability to access that market when it comes to job opportunities. The second best is for travel. We have team members of ours in countries like Armenia where they don't have a great passport. They still go on exotic beach vacations. They still get visas to go to Paris or to go to Los Angeles. If you need networking, you can probably get a US visa if, you just have some other passport. You can get a UK visa. We had a couple of our team members who needed visas to go to Ireland. They got them. Do you have a salary? Do you have a job? Come on in. And if you just want to network, people say, well, I want to be in the US because I want to meet people in Austin or Silicon Valley or whatever, the Bitcoin communities in Miami now, whatever. Well, you can go there. I mean, you probably don't network every day. You probably go to a handful of events, you probably meet some friends. I mean, just, live in the Bahamas tax-free, or live in the Cayman Islands, or live in Panama tax-friendly, or wherever, and have your more neutral passport where you can save taxes, and then you can come and visit the people that you want to network with every once in a while. A lot of people do that. The second thing for me is I don't want to necessarily be associated with what a country does. I'm a big fan of neutrality in my banking. I'm a big fan of neutrality in my business, and I'm a big fan of neutrality in my passports. So if you go back to the 1970s, planes were getting hijacked, they'd come on. Who are the Americans? Maybe now they would target a few more different countries. But back then, the US was more powerful, was more of a standout as the one superpower than it is today. Now you fast forward to geopolitical wars, trade wars. I think the US overplayed its hand. 29% of the world is sanctioned by the US. Some of those countries are growing, and they're growing rapidly. And so Jim Rogers spoke at our annual event, Nomad Capitalist Live, and he said, I can't invest in certain fast-growing markets or certain opportunities because the U.S. won't let me. I don't live in the U.S., he says. He lives in Singapore, but I'm an American citizen, and so I'm restricted with where I can invest. If you run a business, do you think those 29% of countries want to do business with you if you have a U.S. company? So I want my banking and my business to be diversified to where I can take advantage of all the opportunities in the world. You're certainly allowed to set your own moral standards for what you want and don't want. But if you think that the U.S. government is the ultimate arbiter of morality in the world, or the UK government, we would strongly disagree on that. I mean, look at all the constant geopolitical talk now. There's talk about, does the U.S. pull out of NATO? I think it's probably unlikely. But even just the suggestion of it has European countries kind of pulling back a little. Europe at times has talked very unseriously about pulling visa-free access from Americans, but guess what? They put up a new form-filling requirement Americans are going to have to go through probably by 2025. I just think that, people are not going to be as desperate to have people come to their country with passports that, there's less connection with. I just think the geopolitical winds are changing, and I certainly think that you're going to see more residence programs favor certain types of people. And so, during the pandemic, I was happy not to live in the United States. If you're from a European country, you probably would have been happy not to be living there, most of them at least. Canada, Australia, right? And so those countries, it was harder for some of those citizens to go to other countries because they're from big countries and they had, COVID issues. And so it'd be better to be St. Lucian during the pandemic than it was to be American. It really was. I don't necessarily want to be associated with the policies of a country that is provocative. And so if I have a passport that is a crappy passport because it's a small island or it's a country most people don't know where it is, that's actually a positive to me. If you think of like the most exclusive and luxurious stuff, is it the bar with the big sign in the front, or is it the place with the tiny brass plaque and you have to know exactly where it is and which door to go in? I'd rather have the passport equivalent of that sleek lounge where you have to know and then you go, because quite frankly, again, being from a Caribbean country does not really dramatically limit your travel flexibility. Visa-free travel around the world is generally improving. And so 63 countries are now part of Schengen Annex 2. That's the visa protocol that says you can go to the European Union or the Schengen countries, mainland Europe, for 90 out of 180 days. An American, a Canadian, an Australian has the exact same privileges as a Georgian, a Serbian, a Colombian, a St. Lucian. Exact same. Plus, you got the countries that are in the European Union that have freedom of movement. 90 countries out of, I guess, probably 210 or so jurisdictions that issue passports, something like that. Almost half the world can go visa-free to Europe. If you're from the US, that's 1 out of 90 countries. Only 2 out of 54 African countries can go to Europe. And so I have talked about how having an African passport wouldn't be the worst thing for certain types of more adventurous entrepreneurs or people with extreme plan Bs who want to be off the grid in the future. But that's probably not going to be your first, second passport to get. And so if you just exclude the African countries, you're talking about close to 2/3 of the world can now visit Europe exactly the same way as a Canadian, American, and Australian. How is your passport so superior? I understand you don't care about going to Equatorial Guinea. I had a friend of mine with a straight face tell me when I'm renouncing citizenship, he said, you'll have to get a visa for Equatorial Guinea now because the U.S. has a very exclusive visa-free regime with them. I said, yeah, I think I'll be fine. And so you're seeing other countries that are opening up. All these non-judgmental countries, from Belarus to Ecuador, you can like them or not, but all these smaller countries are opening up. And guess what? They're more opening up to Armenia, St. Lucia, Uruguay than they are to the West. And so you're seeing passports becoming very much similar. Yes, 2 out of 54 African passports can visit Europe. And there's a couple that can go to like only the UK or only Ireland. But like bottom line is if you have an African passport, your travel is largely limited to Africa and Asia. Not a lot of countries there. So exclude those countries. The remaining 70 to 75% of passports are getting dramatically better. So a crappy passport, as defined by people from a country like the US, is one where no one's heard of it. I think it's good to be from a country that no one's ever heard of, because the vast majority of countries you go to, when they stamp you in, they just scan the passport. It tells them how long you can stay, and then they let you in. They're not like, you're not one of the you're just from Montenegro. You're so much worse than the Americans. They're like, yeah, 90 days? 90 days? Okay, great, 90 days. Thank you for coming in. I've seen people with Turkish passports go to places. They got Turkish, the Citizenship by Investment program. They bought an apartment, they got a passport, and they turn up somewhere. Nobody cares. They really don't. And even if you're from Egypt, in most cases, they don't care. So my idea is build a portfolio of a couple passports, that you've got diversification. You're free from some of the geopolitical craziness that could come down. You're free from some of the new taxes that countries might impose on citizens or on residents. And you can move around between those different passports. That's something that Nomad Capitalist helps our clients do. Some clients just want to get 1 second passport, a couple bank accounts, maybe set up a trust, just kind of do a more holistic plan. Other clients want as many passports. We had a guy had about $300 million. Not all the clients have $300 million. If you have $1 million, we can help you. But this guy had $300 million. He's like, I want as many as I can. We literally made kind of a list of like 15 passports if you got them all together. You could have gotten more, but it would have started to become duplicative needlessly. And so we made a list of 15 different passports. And I forget, it was like $6 or $7 million in donations and investments and all that kind of stuff. But, he ultimately did not go with that many. But he said, let's get a number of those because I want to protect myself. And guess what? There are some of those that are either small countries or the travel's not as good or the people there aren't as wealthy. And to their discredit, some Westerners would laugh at them, would laugh at someone holding that passport. And yet if you're already successful And you can contribute to that country's economy by investing or making a donation or doing whatever else. And you can feel like, okay, I got this passport. You're going to be in a much better position, in my opinion, than someone who's only relying on the US passport in some image of the 1970s, where, oh, the US will always come and bail me out. The US is actively provoking not only, militarily, but economically, other countries in a way that's going to disadvantage their own citizens and their businesses. So having a crappy passport doesn't bother me. If you'd like to explore these alternative citizenships, it's something you can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, and we'd love to help you with. Find the freedom that I found personally.